Hey, what's up, family, and welcome to another edition of our weekly webinar. Every week, I try to get on here, we try to get here together to make sure that I'm giving you something that is valuable to helping you develop, build, and refine the systems in your church. If you don't know me already, my name is Henry, and I am the owner and founder of Simple Systems Consulting. We are a church consulting firm that really focuses on helping leaders grow the church without burning out their leaders and without using complicated marketing. When we talk about growth, sometimes we jump straight to the numerical, but we believe as a part of our philosophy that growth is really a multifaceted approach. We want people, number one, to grow spiritually. When we grow people spiritually, it tends to leak over and lean over into other things. We want to see the church, yes, grow numerically. We want to see the church grow financially so that you have more resources to impact more lives. All of those things for us to define growth. And so we want to help you excel at what God has called you to do. And so thank you for joining us. And we're excited to have you be a part. If you're watching us on one of our video platforms, whether that be YouTube or Facebook, two things you could do for me. Number one, go ahead and click like. Make sure that you click the like button, click the heart button, whatever it is. But go ahead and share this to your timeline. There is somebody else, somebody on your team, another church leader, somebody else who needs to hear this. And we've heard even here recently many leaders saying to us, hey, look, I'm not a pastor, but the stuff that I heard you talking about, it applied to my business and it's been a blessing to me. As a matter of fact, I had several conversations, even just this week, with people saying, hey, what's the business version of this? And so that's been really unique. So whoever you are, there's somebody on your timeline who'll be blessed by this. Take a moment and go ahead and click share. Also, if you want to get this presentation, I've made the entire slide deck available to you. All you got to do is text AI 2020 to the number on the screen. That's 877-660-2664. And when you text that number to the screen, that's on the screen, you're going to get a reply with a link for you to go in and access this entire slide deck so you can have it, you can work through it, you can walk through it all on your own. All right. So look, let's jump in. Let's get started. So this is week 4. For the last month, for the last 4 weeks, we've been reviewing this idea of the technology of gates. For those of you who maybe haven't heard this already, this technology of gates idea really was birthed from a conference that I spoke at earlier this month. And at that conference, my task was to talk about seeing the church in a new way and having a different approach to the church. And one of the things that I argue is that gates, the gates specifically of Jerusalem, help for us to paint a picture of how all these different things that happen in and around the life of the church come together to affect the totality of what's happening inside of the city. And so we talked about all these different gates, right? And so for us, I transposed the gates of Jerusalem to the gates of systems within the church. And one of the things that we really did and that we really talked about was just how they all matched up. So for example, as we started to walk through the different gates, we saw that there was one gate called the fish gate, right? And this fish gate is where they bring in the fish to process it before taking it to market, which in the church represents assimilation, right? How do we transition people from the outside to the inside of the church? And so we've been walking through that process, all right? And so You can go back and you can review. I'll do a quick review because we're going to talk about the final three systems or the final few systems there in that process. But you can go back to the book of Nehemiah and you can read some of this through that slide deck. All right. But let's just summarize what we've talked about. We talked about vision clarity, the importance of knowing what you're building, right? Of not just guessing as you go, but having a clear strategy and a clear plan for this is what the vision will look like when it comes to pass. Many times we miss celebratory moments because we haven't clearly enough marked the space at which celebration will happen. I remember many years ago as a young pastor, I used to boast about never taking a vacation or a sabbatical. And I was 26 years old, 27. I was really young. And then one day, one of my contemporaries, another pastor, said to me, he says, "Well, when do you get a vacation? When you die?" And I was like, I need to think about that, right? And I was boasting because I was like, you know what? I had in my head somewhere defined faithfulness to my call as always showing up and doing what I knew how to do, right? And over time, my definition of leadership has evolved and it has changed some. And don't get me wrong, I still struggle with trying and wanting to do it all and wanting to be involved in everything. But my thoughts had to evolve because if that was a target, I had made it to that target and it wasn't a whole lot to celebrate. And so what I had to do is I had to shift my mindset to go, it's not about me getting to a destination, it's about us getting to a destination. It's about our church getting to a destination. And so I say that to say that you need to be clear on what you're trying to build. If your goal is just a packed church service, then that's what you'll have. But if your goal is equipping new people, then you've got to start to look at the vision differently. If the goal is to help people discover who God has called them to be, then you got to look at the goal differently. And so you need to be clear about what you're building because the language you use will really help attract the people who are called to you. I like to say it this way: the bait you use determines the fish you catch. And so if your bait is great church service, then you attract and you tend to speak the language of people who are just looking for great church service. But if your bait is developing people, discipleship, then you start to reach out to people who want to be developed. One of the mixed messages that I see so much in the church is from churches that bait people in with one thing and get frustrated when they don't become this other secret thing that they never talked about. It's baiting people in and say, hey, look, come to this amazing church service we have. And then get frustrated when people want to tip in late and tip out early and not serve and be a part. It's about being really clear about what you're building. We talked about how it's hard for people to execute what you can't articulate. When you can't be clear about what the vision is, people can't be clear about how they execute it. So you've got to lay out the vision for what it is, which means that when you lay out what the vision is, you're also laying out what the vision is not. If I say that I want to be someone who is in the best shape of my life and I want to be as fit and as trim as I was in college, I am automatically saying no to some of the things I want to eat. I'm naturally saying no to cake every night. I'm naturally saying no to the other things because vision not only tells us where we're going, it tells us where we're not going. Right? If I'm on a road trip and I say, "Hey, look, we're driving to Florida automatically says that we're not driving to 49 other states. It eliminates all these other things. And that's one of the beauties of vision is that clear vision eliminates all of these would-be distractions because it really focuses you by making sure that your attention is moving in the right direction. And that's important because you're going to go through hard seasons as a leader. The people around you are going to go through hard seasons. They're going to go through seasons where stuff is happening in their families, in their marriages, in their lives, all these different things. And you need a reason strong enough to keep going. The human will is something else. I remember hearing and seeing the stories of people who were on their deathbed, but who somehow held on until a relative came from 5 states over to make it to their side before they passed away. The human will is something spectacular. And a part of that is when a person decides that a reason is strong enough, they can endure through so many different things. And so a part of this is seeing that clear vision teaches people why we do what we do. right? If we just teach people what to do, we create yes people. But if we teach them why we do it, now we're reproducing. And so you've got to make sure that you're really thinking through why we do what we do. And so when we talk about gates, we're talking about these transitional spaces that manage the going in and the coming out. They manage the security and the protection. They manage all those different things, right? I remember, when you hear childhood stories all the time, you see these castles, right? Everybody had a castle, right? In the childhood story. Well, in this castle, there was often a gate or a moat or a bridge or something like that. And the castle did a couple things. It was designed to keep intruders out, but it was also designed to keep the right people in. To that end, the design of a castle and the design of a prison sometimes aren't much different. The difference is the culture of the ones who are in charge. Oh my goodness. Lord, have mercy. Help me. A prison and a castle are not much different. The difference is the culture of the one who's in charge. A castle can become a prison, right? If that's the way it's led and that's the way it's managed. And so the point is this: is that you've got to understand that we want to see gates as divine defensive measures, right? We want to make sure that we're protecting the church from leaking, where people come in the front door and go out of the back. But we also want to make sure that we're protecting the people from the wiles of the enemy by developing them and raising them up in real time as a part of the church. And so we've got to make sure that we're minding the gap, right? So that we're paying attention to transitions, right? There's a space between where you are and where you're called to go, right? For the Israelites, that space was called the wilderness, and a lot of stuff got lost in the wilderness, right? This journey from Egypt to the promised land could have been a relatively short journey, but they could not mind the gap. Their faith wasn't strong enough to mind the gap, or many of them rather. And there were so many issues in there that they lost stuff, man. It breaks my heart. Sometimes we glaze over that story that they had to walk around this mountain for 40 years until the people with the bad attitudes died, right? Well, think about the people with the bad attitudes and the lack of faith as your family. Think about those as good people who are around you every day, but just who got lost in the gap, so beat up by what they had come out of that they were struggling to even imagine, right? They had been slaves for so long. They were struggling to figure out what it looks like to be in charge, right? And so they lost so many things in the gap. And I think about how many of those people were gifted. They spent their whole lives working for Pharaoh. They spent their whole lives doing all these other things that they could have done freely in the promised land, but the gap got them. And so we've got to mind the gap because gates cover gaps. Gates help us make sure that people aren't just falling along the wayside as we go. And so one of the ways that we do that, and to really help us see the importance of that focus, is by leaning into the divine patterns. One of the things that I see when I look at this idea of scripture, even when you go to the Great Commission, when Jesus gives us this mandate, he gives a church wide its mission statement and its marching orders. He makes some things very clear, and here's how I put that together: gather people, grow people, and send people to go. Right? That's really what he says. He says, make disciples, which is introduce people to Jesus, grow them up, and develop their faith, but then teach them to obey all the things I commanded you, right? Teach them to go out and do the same stuff I just called you to do. So just like you're here making disciples, they should be becoming disciple makers. And that's important. The church is not just called to make disciples. We're called to make disciple makers, right? That's why Paul says to Timothy, take this truth that you have heard of us and entrust it to faithful men who entrusted to faithful men, who entrusted to faithful men. And so he's saying, hey, Timothy, I'll just pass something to you, right? So now what you need to do is you need to pass that thing to somebody else, but make sure they understand they're responsible to pass it to the next generation. And so a part of this divine pattern that we've talked about is God forms a thing and then he fills it. Right? He forms it, then he fills it. He creates the environment, he creates the atmosphere, he creates the space, and then he puts in that space things that will thrive there. And so here is the task for you, is that when we talk about systems, what we're trying to talk through, and I want to be clear about this. We don't approach this as though we got all the answers. Like, hey, here's exactly what you do. What we're saying is, here's a framework. Now you take this framework, let it spark some great conversation, and some great forward movement in what you do. And now you go and contextualize that to your team, right? And we love to give you some blueprints. A part of our program, what we do is I give you what we've seen work in the past and some things that are working for us, and we contextualize it for you. But we're giving it to you to say, okay, look, let's lock into this divine pattern. Let's form this environment. Let's form this atmosphere so that the people who can thrive here, that when they show up, we're ready for them. Sometimes we play that game of, hey, look, once the people show up, then we'll get ready. And what we learn, especially in this modern day, is that especially when people struggle to make commitments, and as it already is, and sometimes we just make that commitment harder by just being disorganized when people show up. We have to be organized enough to help people take their next steps. All right. So the systems that we've covered so far, we talked about four. We talked about the worship planning system, making sure that you have a plan for how you plan your weekend services. Do you have an agenda? Do you have a format? Do you have people who are responsible for things? Who's responsible for picking the worship songs? Who's responsible for greeters and ushers and hospitality and all these different things? We talked about the assimilation system. Who's responsible for walking people through a process, new people when they show up? Who does that? Who helps with that? Who makes that happen? Super important for us to walk through and be prepared for. Next is we talked about the evangelism system. How are we going to intentionally reach new people and intentionally invite new people to be a part of the church? They're not just going to show up, right? They pass by church buildings every day. People pass by church buildings all the time without any kind of inkling of, you know what, I need to go visit there. That's not what people are thinking about when they pass the average church. So they're not just going to show up just because you're there. This isn't Field of Dreams. Just because you build it doesn't mean they will come, right? That's not the main thing. I would even argue to somebody, and I'm going to say this because I just feel it in my spirit. So I'm going to drop it on out there. Your building may not be the main reason that you aren't moving forward, that you aren't seeing new people. It's not, man. I can point to numerous places that don't have great buildings, and their church grew through a season where eventually maybe they got a facility, but that wasn't the main thing. It just wasn't. If I'm honest, the church plant that we grew for several years, we were in a storefront. we started out renting one suite of the storefront, and and then we rented out another suite so we could use it for children's ministry, and then we used another suite to use it for offices and meeting space. And but in between us was a hair shop. So there's a hair salon right here in our church right here, and that's just where we had church, and we only had like 12 parking spaces. So everybody else had to park a half a block or a whole block down the street, in a gravel parking lot, and women were scuffing up their heels and they were frustrated, and they started getting their husbands and boyfriends to drop them off. Then you go park and come back. And all of those issues that we had, and I used to think every day they're going to destroy us. It wasn't. God was doing something on the inside. And so, it's not that. But you do need to be prepared for how are you going to reach new people. And then we talked about the community system, right? How do you connect people with each other? How do you connect believers with other believers, right? How do you help them to walk in unity together? Then we talked about our volunteer system. Like, how do we help people get plugged into volunteering? How do we help them to serve? How do we help them to come along part of the church? And then we talked about generosity, the generosity system. How do we develop people into generous givers? The average person coming into the church, they don't understand the biblical mandate to give. But then even beyond that, on a practical sense, they don't understand what they're giving to. And so we have to develop that. That's a part of discipleship, just like everybody else. The disciples of Acts 2 didn't just wake up one day saying, we want to give away everything. That was something that was taught to them by Jesus. It was something that was taught to them, that the mission that they were committed to was worth everything. It was worth everything. They saw Jesus live it. Jesus had prepared them for it. He sent, before they even get to Acts 2, where the disciples and the believers share all things common, Jesus sends them out two by two and says, don't take anything with you. He says, I'm going to provide what you need along the way. I need you to know that I'll always got your back, that this mission is worth it, that this mission is important as long as you're taking care of my mission. This is what he tells them. He goes even in Matthew 6:33, seek ye first the kingdom. All these things are going to be added to you. Like, those are things that were on the pathway. to starting to set a foundation of generosity in their heart, because he knew they couldn't be generous unless they were first secure in their relationship of faith. And so he starts to walk them through that, and you can do the same. All right. So those are the 6 systems we talked about so far. Now, let's round this thing out. So, as I would say on a Sunday morning, that was my introduction. Now, if you give me just a few more moments, here goes my sermon. All right. So, if you're watching this, go ahead, click share, tag somebody, add them to this. I'm about to get into the meat of what we're going to talk about today. So, today I'm going to give you the rundown on 4 systems, the 4 final systems we'll talk about. And then we'll close out. All right. And I'm excited about this. All right. So, number 7 is the next gate that we come to is what's called the Water Gate. And this Water Gate is a gate that led to the Gihon Spring, right? And for us, this gate comes alongside the Outreach Gate, right? Because that spring was a place of life. It was a place that meant something special to everybody. It meant something special to all of the people who were there. Even the people inside the city, yes, but even the people outside would have found um, great value from this spring, which is why we call it the outreach system. We believe that outreach is how we as a church inspire our community to believe in the mission of the church today. And so, what that means is that the church has a responsibility to go outside of its 4 walls and to make a difference in the lives of people who are around us. Here's the reality. A couple years ago, and I said a couple years ago, but this may be 20 years ago, a decade ago, it started to become popular for churches and leaders to see themselves as being international, and to see themselves as being leaders and people who are whose mission stretches far and wide, right? We even saw, and more recently, we've seen this kind of language of people taking the city, right? Taking their city, taking their unique town, whatever it is, and so on and so on. Well, here's a starting point. How do we become international if the people around us don't even know we exist? And I'm going to tell you a hard truth. And you can choose to not believe it. You can either argue with me on it. If you want to argue in the chat, just go ahead and drop in the chat and say, I don't believe that this is not true. Most churches, the vast majority of the people around them don't even know that they exist. They don't even know that they're there. I was working with a pastor who's a part of our fellowship just earlier this year. And we were looking at a facility because he had identified an area where he wanted to kind of plant a church. And we were going in to go out and just look at this area. And we went in this area and we saw a church. And I looked at the church and I was like, oh, well, this place looks available. Let's see if we can find out who owns it so we can call them and see about, we can buy it or whatever it is, so on and so on. Right. And so we're walking around the church and we're looking at it because on this particular day we went, the grass wasn't cut, um, and everything was just kind of like really dirty, dingy. Like it just looked abandoned. It looked like nobody was caring for it. The windows were dirty. It wasn't any parking around. It just looked like it had just been sitting. Well, so we went one day. We looked around. We talked about it. Whatever. We come back, maybe a week or two later, and there's somebody outside. And we're like, hey, you know who owns the church? She was like, yeah, we own it. I was like, oh, so y'all still having a church here? And she was like, yeah, we're still having a church here. Now, keep in mind, there was no sign. There was no any of this, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm going like, okay, I go to church all the time. And I came to this church on a day that wasn't a Sunday, right? Because keep in mind, most churches only operate on Sunday and maybe a Wednesday night, right? And so I go to this church and my assumption is, oh, it's abandoned. And here's what I'm telling you. That's just me looking at the building, right? But most people around our churches, they just don't know that they're there if we haven't gone out into the community. And so what we need to do is that we need to go into the community. Now, let me say this. I am a firm believer that outreach is not meant to be some kind of transaction, right? Let me be clear about this. Outreach is not a church growth transaction. Outreach, the primary goal of outreach is not if we give you stuff, you're going to come to church. Because I can tell you right now, 95% of people you give stuff away to will not come to church. They just won't. That's not how that works. Right? I don't care how many book bags you give away. I don't care how many food boxes you give away. I don't care about none of that. Like those people are not necessarily going to come to church because they're not connecting the two things. Right? Think about how weird that is. Right? Think about how weird that is. Like think about um I'm gonna use a secular example here, right? Because I know we church folks, but let's not act like, we don't understand life, right? So let's imagine you go to a party. You go to a party, say you're a single guy, and you see a young lady over there, and you say, "Man, she's really pretty." And you go over there and you buy her a drink, and you say, "Hey, look, here's a drink for you. I just wanted to, man, you just beautiful. I just wanted to buy you a drink." And she says, "Oh, thank you so much." She drinks her drink, she hanging out with her friends. Do you expect her to show up at your door the next day, even if you give her your card and your number? Do you expect her to just show up at your house or at your office like the next day? No. And the same is true for the church. Just because you do something nice for people doesn't mean they're gonna go, you know what? They gave me food. I better go over here. Because here's the reality. The stuff that most of the time we give away, other people are giving away too. In most cases, other people are giving away. And so here is why I'm saying this. This is what I think the reason for evangelism is. Number one, you need to teach the disciples in your church that we are called to be outward focused. We're called to care about what's happening with other people. We're called to serve other people with no strings attached because that's what God has done for us. But then number two, if there is a benefit to outreach, it is the connections you get to make with real people in your community. You can get to know the principal at your local schools. You can get to know your local fire chief or police chief. You can get to know real people doing real work in your city, in your town. You can get to know the head of the community association. You can get to know all of those different people and build relationships with them that really, really matter. And then thirdly, outreach. If you're speaking to anybody specifically about connecting with the church with outreach, you're speaking to people around your church who have the same heart as you, right? There are some people who are very successful in their lives and they're looking for a place where they can serve and help make a difference in the kingdom, but they're looking for other people who share the same heart as them. Well, in outreach, as you tell the story, you're saying to people, hey, look, this is what we're about, right? This is what we're about. Well, we're taking our resources and we're trying to make a difference in other people's lives. This is what we're about. We one of the things that our finance director for our church does that I really love is that about twice a year he grabs a group of people when we get ready to make the budget and about halfway through the budget year, and he sits down with them and shows them the budget, shows them where money is going, showing them where things are doing. And he says, "Hey, look, give me your thoughts. Does anything look out of place? Does anything look out of whack? How do these things look? What's happening? What's going on? What do you see?" Well, one of the pieces of feedback that came out of that panel of I think 5 people this year is they said we're giving to way more stuff than we talk about. Because we've got about 5 mission partners that we support on a monthly basis, right? We support these other organizations, and we give, not only do we send them money and we give them tangible resources every month, but we also partner with them for events throughout the year. And we go and we don't take over the event, we just go serve in whatever capacity they ask us, right? The local elementary school says, hey, and COVID parent with his parent, COVID thing, parent can't come into the school on the first days of school. So we've got young kids, it's their first time here. We need volunteers to just who we can vet, who we can, walk through COVID protocols. And then they just walk the kids to school. So open the door, let kids out of the door, walk them to their class. All right, cool, let's do it. And we go and we serve. And not a single time have we gone with our own motive. We didn't go with flyers. We didn't go with our T-shirts. We went in low and we just serve them how we can serve them, because that's about us going in and serve them and letting them know that we care about them and we want to be in a relationship. All right. Number 8 is the next is the horse gate. This is a gate that led to the stables. This gate led out to the place where the horses were kept, where they were cared for, where they were trained, where they were developed, the whole nine. And this coincides with our leadership development system. Listen, as a church, as leaders, you've got to have a stable. You've got to make sure you have a stable. You've got to make sure that there's a place where the thoroughbreds, where the horses, where the leaders of the next generation, can be trained and developed for what's coming. All right. And one of the reasons it was even said that at this gate, this is where David would meet his soldiers prior to battle and even when they're coming back from battle. And because here's the thing, here's one of the reasons you need stables is a day of battle is coming. The day of battle is coming. And we know that even more as a church. And if the day of battle comes and finds us unready, then we find ourselves in a predicament. And so one of the things that you need to do is that you need to make sure that you have a plan for how you're going to develop leaders. And I know this looks different for everybody. It doesn't have to be complicated. If you just want to start really, really simply, just set a plan to meet with 3 people who are potential leaders every week. Just every week, just grab them and go to lunch with them, go to breakfast with them, work through a book with them, whatever it is, and just start, investing in them, right? Start investing in who they are. Send them articles, send them YouTube videos to watch, whatever it is. But just start developing because you're going to need those horses on the day of battle. And so you've got to make sure that you find your strategy. And every strategy is different. For us right now, one of the things that we do is that we meet with our ministry leaders once a month and we come together and we're trying to have significant and important and valuable conversations around what we're doing and where we're headed and where we're going and what it means to be a leader in the Lord's church in the era we live in. Not only that, I try to spend one-on-one time with leaders because a part of development isn't just teaching people how to think, but it's just being there with people. Like you can develop people more just through relationship than anything else. And so I just try to meet with our leaders at least once every 2 weeks. Just sit down with them for a one-on-one. Sometimes in person, sometimes via Zoom. But it's just me saying, hey, look, I want to get to know you and have a relationship because I'm telling you, it's going to be hard. It gets harder to develop leaders, especially in small churches, without relationship. In larger churches, people don't expect relationship as much because they assume that everybody is busy keeping the big machine running. But in churches, in intimate churches under 150, people expect things to be more personal. And so you need to be thinking about how you can do that. All right. And then number 9 is the East Gate. This is the gate that faced the Mount of Olives, the gate that people often look forward to because this is the mountain and the place that many people believe is going to have significance in the coming days. And so we compare this to the communication of the church. This gate was a place of great hope. The Mount of Olives gave people something to really look forward to as it came and relate to their faith. And so as a result, we think the same about communication is that as a church, we've got to learn how to communicate in a way that inspires hope in people, not just about the church, but even about who they are, where they are, and how they fit into the grand scheme of what God is doing. You know, I'll tell you, man, this is a tough one. This is a tough one. It's especially tough until you get a strong team culture, right? Once you build a strong team culture where everybody, is open and honest, bringing their ideas and their thoughts and their stuff to the table, this is really hard. And one of the reasons it's challenging is because here's the balance: is that you need to communicate in enough time to give people to prepare for something, right? And I will admit that can be hard for me because, it's sometimes I'm thinking about so many different things that it's hard to nail down one or two things that are going to affect everybody else, right? I've got to think about the things that affect the church, yes, but I'm still a person, so I got to think about the things that affect me. I got to think about the things that affect my family. I got to think about the things that affect my work, my job, all those different things I've got to be thinking about. And so as a result, sometimes as leaders, when we get ideas, we have great ideas, but our execution suffers because our runway wasn't long enough. Right. And that's just the God's honest truth. Like, listen, this week, I shared something with one of our leaders. And one of the first things she said to me is like, look, you could have gave me this months ago. Like, and you could have given me this months ago and I could have done it, been finished with it, laid it out and been good to go. Right. And I told her, I was like, you're exactly right. Like, you're exactly right. Right. But here's another thing that we also talked about. And I've had this conversation with several other pastors as well, is that the balance that we've got to strike is that we want to communicate in enough time so that everybody can get on the same page. But we've also got to make sure we're communicating to the right people so that we have the help we need in executing what God has called us to do. And so as a church, we've got to work on communicating. Right. And so here's a bonus system, one final one. They had the inspection gate. This is where it said that David would inspect his troops, where he would look at them, he would watch over them, see, how they were. It's the inspection gate. And we call this the accountability system, which is somebody needs to be responsible for monitoring what's happening with everybody. Somebody needs to be responsible for monitoring what's happening with all the different systems in the church. Because if you implement systems and you implement these things, but there's nobody there to watch over them, there's nobody there to monitor them, there's nobody there to check them out, there's nobody there to do those things, then eventually they just fall by the wayside. And you put them in place, but there's nobody watching over them. And so you need to make sure that there's some accountability and that there's some stuff there. All right. And so really, again, if you haven't already, if you go now and you text AI 2022 to the number on the screen, 877-660-2664, you can get this entire presentation. You can have it, you can take it on. And all of this is what we cover in our program, the Church Systems Bootcamp. And in this program, we walk alongside senior leaders and their teams to help them to begin to implement these systems. And I tell you, man, I can't wait for you to get a chance to hear from some other people just the value that our systems provide. And really, let's go beyond the systems, our program. We really go above and beyond to help the leaders we work with. We work with leaders of all shapes and sizes. We are very selective in who we work with, so we don't say yes to everybody. Because some churches, you need some more foundational things before we can really step in and help you. Or maybe we look at you and go, hey, you don't necessarily need our help with this, but here's something you can do, whatever it is. So we are selective about that. But the churches that we do work with is that we step into where they are. And so we have churches in our program who are 3,000 people. We have a church in our program that's 15 people. And so we've got people from all wide ranges, because the reality is that the word of God and God's mandate doesn't change based on size, but we do need to contextualize it. God's word stays the same. His message stays the same, but our methods do need to adjust. Some things and some different forms of communication that are acceptable in churches under 150 are completely unacceptable if it's 1,000 people. Right? If we've got less than 150 people, we can send out a text, we can talk to people, we can make phone calls if we've got 20 or 30 of us. But when you get to 1,000 people, you can't call everybody. Even when you get to 250 and 500, you can't call everybody. You've got to have better ways of doing things. And so that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we're building out the processes for churches. So if you're interested and you want to know more about our program, you can visit our website, simplesystems.cc. All of the information is there. I will tell you, we're getting ready to go through a transition. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be releasing some information about a new offering that we're adding to our program that is going to revolutionize how the church approaches systems. It's just going to be amazing. And so that is coming. And when that comes, guess what? Price went up. It's gonna cost a little bit more because of what we're pouring into the program. And I promise, when you hear it, it's gonna be worth it. But here's the beauty: everyone who's in our program before we launch that new component, they're gonna be grandfathered into that program, and so they'll get all of the things that we're doing. They'll get it as a add-on and a part of their current subscription. They won't have to go back in there and repurchase a separate thing. So if you're interested, go ahead and plug that in. Well, listen, these 4 weeks have been amazing. We've been talking about the technology of gates. And I want to leave you with this encouragement. I want to challenge you, whatever role you're in, start the conversation about systems in the church, right? I hope you're praying. I hope you're committing some significant time, or you've got a team of people who are helping to pray for the church and about the community that the church is in. I hope that you are really doing your best to stay true to the word of God and to preach his gospel and his truth in the way that he intended. I hope you're doing all of those things. because a system is not a cure all and a fix all, but it will help you manage what God has put in your hand and what He's entrusted you with. And so I want to encourage you, start right now having a conversation about systems in your church and your church culture. And if we can help any way, you know how to get to us. You can reach out to us here. You can reach out to us there, wherever you want. We're here for you. All right. So listen, I am excited about what God is doing. And don't forget, join us right back here next week. We're going to continue the conversation, giving you something that can help you take the next step. All right. Until next